Good morning, students. Happy Thursday. So we're continuing still with our graphs, our charts and our graphs. Yesterday we started picture graphs and today we have a new picture graph. Instead of bikes, today we have little clocks. And this graph that we're going to be working with today represents an example of America's work week. So what did the typical work week in America look like in these years? So remember, we have to interpret all of the information in our graph first before we start answering questions. So here we have the typical work week in 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, and 1990. Now, very importantly, what does each symbol represent? Each symbol represents 10 hours. So just like the bikes yesterday, that represented 1,000 for each symbol, these little clocks represent 10 hours. So that means that, for example, in 1950, 1, 2, 3, 4, it didn't represent 4 hours a week. That wouldn't make sense. It would represent 10, 20, 30, 40 hours a week. So make sure that when you're interpreting your picture graph that you are counting by tens, because each of these symbols equals 10 hours. Also notice that in this graph we have two halves. So here in 1960 and here in 1970, we have a half. So make sure that you take into account that if each work week symbol equals 10 hours, then these halves would equal 5 hours because they are cut in half. Okay, now that we've interpreted all of our information from our graphs, we can start answering questions. And we're going to start with our samples as usual. The first sample says, in which year was the work week the longest? So this one's pretty easy to interpret because of course we're going to look for the year with the most symbols. And we can easily see that 1990 had the most symbols, which means the most hours. In this case, it is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 hours. So 50 hours in the typical work week in 1990. So we would write 1990 here. Our second one says, how much shorter was the work week in 1960 than in 1950? So just like our second sample in our bike graph, we have to use another operation. We have to subtract how much shorter. So we're going to take a look at the information in our question. We have to look at 1960 and we have to look at 1950. So here we have our symbols for 1950, which mean 10, 20, 30, 40 hours. And I would just go ahead and write it so that I don't have to keep counting them. Then here in 1960, we have 10, 20, 30, 35, because this one's cut in half. So 1960, 35 hours. So how much shorter? Well, that's pretty easy. If in 1950 it was a 40-hour week and in 1960 it was a 35-hour week, we can easily see that 1950 had a half hour more. Or, in this case, 5 hours more. So, excuse that, not a half hour more, a half of a symbol more. Sorry for the confusion. 5 hours, so 40 minus 35 is 5. How much shorter was the work week in 1960? It was shorter by 5 hours. So yes, half a symbol, not half an hour. That's why we have the 5 here. 10, 20, 30, 35. So you will continue on from 1 through 10, making sure that you are counting your symbols by 10. Okay, so here for Thursday, we are continuing on with our quotations, our quotation marks. And this time we're going to understand the difference between quotation marks and underlining, especially when it comes to books, magazines, newspapers, and the information in them. So, just as a side note, oftentimes you will see writers using quotation marks for every kind of title or any kind of name of a book, etc. But it is the more proper way to use underlining. So when we get down to Think B, we're going to begin that, and I have an example below. But before that, for Think A, you're going to need to place needed quotation marks around the speaker's words in this passage. So you're going to read this passage and you're going to place all of the quotation marks around the words that are being said. That's it. So just continued practice from this week's concepts and learning. Then, of course, for Look Closely, I have some little arrows here because this is really important. It says to notice the use of ellipsis points. So, ellipsis points are these 3 little dots. And we use these 3 little dots often, especially when we're sending texts, to kind of let the person know that we have more to say or that we have more that we're thinking. But the use of ellipsis points in writing shows that some of the speaker's words have been omitted. Omitted means that they have been left out. So, just know when you see these 3 little dots, it means that the speaker had more to say, but it wasn't quoted. So, for example, if you were having a conversation with a friend and you wanted to quote someone about a story they were telling, but you didn't want to quote the entire story, just the important parts or the important part, then you would write 3 dots after to let the reader know that there was actually more information than was given. Okay. For Think B. Think B may be a little confusing, but we're going to go back to yesterday's Look Closely section to better understand it. It says to correctly underline or put quotation marks around the titles in the following sentences. Now, if we go here to Look Closely on yesterday's assignment, it says you underline the title of a book, so titles of books, magazines, newspapers. You use quotation marks around the titles of things that you would find inside a book, magazine, or newspaper. Okay, so just as a little side note, sometimes writers just use quotation marks around everything, around the titles and what's inside of the title. But the proper way is to underline the main title of the book, magazine, or newspaper. So that's what we're going to do. And I've already done the first one. I'm going to show you why and how I did it. Okay. So the first one says, today's story in the New York Tribune is entitled, Tornadoes Hit the Midwest. Okay. So you may be confused if you notice here there are 2 titles. Which one do we underline? Which one do we put quotation marks around? But look closely. You underline the main titles. I'm going to put main here. Like the main title of your book, your newspaper, your magazine, and anything inside of those books, magazines, or newspapers, they get quotes. So, number 1 says, today's story in the New York Tribune, the New York Tribune is a newspaper, is entitled Tornadoes Hit the Midwest. So, this is the main title of our newspaper, New York Tribune. So, I have placed an underline under it. In the New York Tribune, there is a story entitled Tornadoes Hit the Midwest. But notice that this title, Tornadoes Hit the Midwest, is in the newspaper. So we are going to quote it. This does not get underlined because this is just a story in the newspaper. It's not the newspaper. So you're going to do numbers 2 through 9 in this way, making sure you're underlining the names of books, newspapers, or magazines, and putting quotes around anything inside of those. And of course, we will go over this when we have our language arts small group as needed. Then for go back, it's just a little review, just making sure that you completed your exercises correctly. Did you put all quotation marks outside commas and periods? So notice, if you put the quotes inside, make sure you correct that. So here, my favorite poems include Opportunity, The Highwayman, and The Charge of the Light Brigade. So it's just showing an example that the comma is inside the quotes. So here for Thursday, we're going to continue on with our word study in our spelling. Remember that today, Thursday, I am also including the assignment for tomorrow, Friday. So the lesson guide for tomorrow is going to be right after this assignment today. So there will not be a separate video for Friday's spelling assignment. So stick around for Friday's guide, or make sure that you come back to this video tomorrow if you are waiting to do your Friday assignment tomorrow. Okay, so here up top, you're going to first circle the common root in each set of words and write the root to complete the sentences. So you're going to take a look at all of the words listed and decide which blend of letters, which root is the same in all of them. And you have 3 sets here. So for number 1, you have format, uniformity, conformed, transformed. What is common in all of these? In these 4, it's the root word form. So notice how each of these words have the root form. So you would write form here. And it says here the root form means to shape. So you learn something with each one. You're going to do the same things with 2 and 3. Then you're going to write a pattern word, so you're only using the first 12, that is being defined. So if you've already done, or you should have done, your definitions for the week, you can take a peek at those and then just match your definitions. And then we have 3 exercises for synonyms. And as I always say, synonyms are words that mean the same or almost the same as another word. You're just going to complete the sentence with a list word that is a synonym. So a word that means the same or almost the same for the word in parentheses. So when they add the words in parentheses, that always makes things easier because you can just take a peek. And here they are. We have changed, atomic, and willpower. So find a synonym in your complete list to finish your sentences. Now, I'm going to go on to Friday's spelling assignment, as I said before. So I've been using a red pen all week, which is good. Oh, actually, no. We have a editing assignment next week. So I thought I was going to be able to use my red pen today to proofread an article, but I just realized that that will be for next Friday. So for today, you guys got lucky. This one's simpler than the proofreading. For today, all you have to do is read this report. It is a science project report example, and you're just going to write the missing words. So up top it says to refer to the spelling dictionary. So if you're having a hard time inserting a list word in these sentences, then take a few words that you think might fit and look up the meaning and see if it works. Also, skip if you're having a hard time and then go back. You have 8 words in this report that you have to fill in. So, let's do just number 1. This is how I blank an empty pizza box into a working solar oven. So, this is a report by a boy named Matthew on how to make a solar oven. So, what is the missing word? This is how I blank an empty pizza box into a working solar oven. So we're using our context clues here to try and figure out the missing word. So try and take your time. Don't immediately say to yourself, oh, I don't know, this is too hard, I can't find it, the words are too long. Go through the list words first. So let's see. We have, let's find it. Okay. So, constructed. Now I was able to find the word easily because I already know what the word constructed means or meant. So notice how I was just able to go down my list and easily find it. This is how I constructed, I'm going to put a number 1 here so I know to put it on the number 1 on the bottom. However, if you're looking through your list and you're not finding it and you're not getting any hints and you're just not understanding the meaning, that is when you either go to your definitions that you have written or you go to your spelling dictionary in the back of the book, usually if they're content words, and try to find the meaning before giving up. Of course, I'm here to answer your questions, but I'm here to help you figure it out, not just to give the direct answer. So, what I would do is I would take a few words that I think might mean what should go in the sentence and then look them up. But if you say them out loud, sometimes it will come to you easier. Like if I read instructor, destruction, constructed. Oh, yeah, constructed sounds like a word that would mean to make something, like construction, for example. So I would write on number 1, constructed. And if I just was really having a very hard time figuring out number 1, then I would just go on to number 2 and so forth. And then possibly on the way, I would be able to determine my answer. But if not, of course, we will have small group to work together.